Welcome to the Master Your Millions podcast, the show all about your financial potential and leaving a legacy for future generations. Here are your hosts, Jason and Scott Henderson.
Welcome back, everyone. I am your host, Scott Henderson, and my co-host is Dr. J. We are extremely excited for this guest coming on, someone I've looked up to for a while. But Dr. J, who do we have coming on?
Well, Scott, I am absolutely thrilled to welcome today's guest, Peter Swain. He is a true trailblazer in the world of AI and digital innovation. With over 25 years of experience across strategy, marketing, and technology, Peter has built a global reputation for helping businesses unlock the full potential of artificial intelligence. He's not only a sought-after consultant and advisor to companies at every stage, from startups to billion-dollar enterprises, but also a captivating speaker known for making the complex world of AI accessible and exciting. Peter's insights have guided countless entrepreneurs and executives, helping them future-proof their businesses in an era of rapid change. Whether it's understanding AI-driven customer journeys or leveraging cutting-edge technology for exponential growth, Peter is the expert you want in your corner. It's an honor to have him here today. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm looking for this guy that you're talking about, but I guess that's me. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to speak with your audience.
Tell us a little bit. Both Scott and I have heard you speak and present a number of times. In fact, right before this interview, I was on one of your events listening to you speak. Tell us a little bit about your background, kind of where you've come from, even in the event you feel comfortable. Share us a little bit about that phone call you had with that guy named Steve, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I started coding when I was 6, because my parents refused to buy me a baby brother from Walmart. So I used to go to the store and ask them to buy me a baby brother, and they said no. So my dad bought me a Spectrum ZX80 and said I should code one for myself. So I did. I mean, it was the worst code ever if anyone ever looked at it. But so I started coding when I was 6. I saw my first application at 12, and then at high school, I was out in a computer world, PC World user group show, and this guy came and spoke to me and talked to me about this new thing called the World Wide Web. And it was Tim Berners-Lee, who's now Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of HTML. And I was completely taken at this idea. So I quit high school. So I'm a high school dropout. I quit high school and became one of the first web developers in the world. I built the UK version of Yelp in 1994. So when I say over 25 years, it's now over 30 years, which really is quite scary. It was the 32nd listing on Yahoo. And yeah, from that, I did 1,400 web projects for everybody from, as you said, governments down to small businesses, charities. I work with people like Williams Formula One, Sony, Colgate, Amdal, Ford, the Euros, the Olympics, The Cure. And then in the mid-2000s, I created the first mobile agency in Europe doing mobile apps. And I did it because I bought an iPhone. And unfortunately, I said the sentence, "This smells the same." I wish I'd said something better, but this smells the same. Because the thing about the web, and I didn't realize it at the time because I was too young, but the thing about the web was my footprint on the world before I discovered the internet was essentially how far I could get my mum to drive me. And for people of a certain age that understand that reference, like 17, "Mum, can I go here? Mum, can I go there?" Like that was my life. And then suddenly I was downloading, it was Sun Tzu's The Art of War from the University of Phoenix's FTP site. And the idea that I could now interact with the world was just intoxicating and amazing. But the problem with the web is whilst it freed us up to deal with everyone, it shackled us to our desktop at the same time, which was not ideal. And when I picked up the first iPhone, the 3GS, I realized that that was the unshackling moment. Like we would go from being able to deal with anyone, anywhere, which was super cool. So I created the first mobile agency, and we dealt with people like Ali G, Jamie Oliver, Gordon Ramsay, McDonald's, Pepsi, like 35 different brands there as well. So I spent most of my time in marketing. And then if we fast forward to the end, 2018, I realized I'd kind of achieved everything I wanted to achieve in that world. And I'd been talking to people about AI. I had a little stop off in being in finance for a couple of years. And then January, February 2023, ChatGPT came around, which is what I call the humanization moment, the time, because we've been doing AI for decades, all of us, but this was the thing that made it work for in people's minds. In the same way, the iPhone wasn't the first mobile device. Like we had our Palm Pilots and our Nokia 9110 communicator, for everybody that remembers that. The mobile computing existed before the iPhone, but it was the iPhone that made people go, "Oh, okay, I get it." And it was ChatGPT that made people jump onto AI. So I've spent since February 23 talking to people purely about AI because it's the next, it makes the other two, it makes web and mobile, honestly, look small. AI is more impactful than web and mobile by a very long way. So that's it. That's what I do now. I talk to people, whether it's in group work or masterminds or coaching, consulting. I help people understand AI.
Now, really quickly, in this process, as you've come up, there was a very specific person that you talked to that a lot of people know by the name of Steve. Could you give us that quick snippet of a story?
Yeah, so I was working with Breaking Bad. I was doing the app for Breaking Bad, which I almost rejected, but I was broke, so I said yes. And it was such a high-profile app that we were on the phone weekly with Sony and Apple discussing how the app would be built and what it would have in it and the functionality. And on one of these calls with Apple, they said I couldn't do what I was trying to do because it was against what was called at the time the Human Interface Guidelines. So when you used to do Apple apps for Apple, they used to give this rule set of what you could do and how you could do it. And I said the sentence, "I'm sorry, I disagree, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but in point thingy, clause thingy, subpoint thingy, it says in this instance I can do this, not that." And somebody said he's got a point, and then the phone went dead, and I was like, "Oh shit, I've just screwed up this call." And it's hard now because we're all in Zoom worlds, but it's on one of those old spider phones, like the Viacom, spiders in the middle of the conference room. I was like, "Oh my God, I've just screwed up a deal with Sony and Apple." They just hung up on me. And I got a call the next day from Brian Johns, who was the head of the developer relations for Apple. And he said, "Hey, so about that call yesterday," I'm like, "Brian, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to upset anyone." Like, I'm defending myself straight away. Like, "No, no, no." He's like, "Would you shut up a minute?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "So Steve wants you to build an app for Apple." And I'm like, "Who's Steve?" And he said, "Steve." And I went, "Yeah, I know. I heard the name, but who? Steve who?" And he went, "Steve Jobs." And I went, "Oh, that's Steve." Now, as a side note for everybody, I think that is one of the only Steves that doesn't need to be introduced with his full name, right? Because if someone says, "Hey, Elon wants you to do an app for Twitter," it's pretty obvious who Elon is. So I should have probably got it, but he said, "So yeah, Steve wants you." And I'm like, out of interest, how does he know who I am? And bearing in mind, I'm running a mobile agency, so Apple wanting you to do an app for Apple is a pretty big deal in that space. And he's like, "You know the guy yesterday you were arguing with?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "You know the guy that said you had a point?" I'm like, "Yeah." Yeah, that was Steve. I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me that I was on a phone call with Steve Jobs?" And he's like, "Would you have argued if I had?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "That's why we didn't tell you." So yeah, Steve Jobs had apparently walked into the room as we were having this discussion. And in his typical fashion, apparently he had taken over the meeting. So I was having a argument with Steve Jobs, which I won. So yeah, it was an interesting moment because it made and broke that company at the same time. Because it was 2007 when we won the Apple contract. The deal of the contract was we were allowed to publicize the deal, which was one of the only conditions and stipulations I had. So we were allowed to say that we were going to be the first ever app developer that Apple hired to do work for Apple worldwide. But the problem was their payment terms were 90 days upon completion, and it was a 9-month project. So for anyone that listens to this that runs a small business, imagine having to take $200,000 of work in progress and carry it for a year on your books for a client that's going to be as demanding as Apple. So I walked into the company the next day And I walked through my staff and said, listen, you're going to get paid to the cent what you need for the next year. So you need, if you want to carry on working for me, you need to come in here with, this is my train fare, this is my mortgage, this is my electricity, this is my gas, this is my water, this is how much I need for food. And I will find you the money to the cent that you need, but you will not get any more. And if that doesn't work for you, now's a good time to leave, because I did not have the cash flow to do that job. There was no way I had the money. I was going to have to late pay. I was going to have to, put literally, as a famous guy in the UK once said, pay them on the steps. I was going to have to like pay people on the steps of the courthouse to get this thing through. And I went to the bank, and they offered me a $200,000 facility if I did $1 million revenue in my first year. They said, if you do 1 million, because I explained to them, this is Apple, I need your help, and this is the best thing ever. This is the pathway to a $100 million company in like 5 years. But I'll need your help. And they said, if you do $1 million worth of revenue in your first year, we'll give you a $200,000 facility. So we did it. We completed the app. And then we went back for our facility, and it was 2008. Financial crisis hit. Banks got privatized in the UK. And my $200,000 offer got taken off the table, which means my figures didn't work, which means I had to sell the company for 18 cents on the dollar to my nearest competition. So it made us and broke us at the same time.
Wow. When talking to people about AI, would you share with us what you think are the top 3, maybe 4 things that they need to be doing with AI as far as like becoming familiar with it, and then some of the next steps?
Mm-hmm. I would say the first thing, actually, there's 2 things that I'd really focus on. The first is to actually use it. Like it sounds so silly, but AI penetration in Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 is 99.7%. So 99.7% of the Fortune 50 and 100 have a serious AI project, like $1 million line item, somewhere on their budget for an AI project. When you get down to solopreneurs, small businesses, it's closer to a 3% penetration. So 3% of small businesses are actually adopting AI in a serious, meaningful way. So the first thing we ask everyone to do is something really simple, which is 15 minutes a day. Like just use it for 15 minutes a day until you start understanding the power of it. Because the mistake people can make is seeing that it's a tool when it really is an intelligence. The key is in the name. It's an artificial intelligence. It's not an artificial tool. So you have to treat it like an intelligence. If you're treating it like a tool, you're not going to get the results. So the first thing we ask people to do is actually genuinely use it for 15 minutes a day, so you start uncovering the different pieces of it and what you can do with it. Once you're at that level, some kind of self-mastery of yourself, the next thing is to actually do a project as a company. So again, AI penetration in companies sub $50 million is less than 10%. But we're doing a project at the moment for a property management company. They have 9 property managers, and they estimate that they spend 80% of their time answering inbound inquiries. So 80% of their time, these 9 property managers spend their time answering phone calls and answering emails. They're a company based in Manhattan. So the average salary of the property manager is 60K. So they're spending $540,000 a year employing 9 people who are essentially answering the phone to low grade inquiries. And AI can automate all of that. So we're working with them on a AI project that we estimate will free up 70 to 80% of the property management's time within 6 months, which is a huge advantage for them as a company, because they can now they can choose. They can either reallocate that capital somewhere else, or they can reallocate those humans somewhere else, or there's so many different options that they can do. Because the one thing that people haven't yet completely put their head around is, yes, I can do everything I just said. I can give them 70% back of those nine property managers. But in addition to doing that, there is then no scale issue as they increase. Because the one thing that hampers most businesses as they grow is hiring good humans. Like, that is the one thing that stops us achieving the levels we need, is getting the right people in place in time to do the thing. Anyone that's run a business for any amount of time, it's not capital, it's not customers, it's not marketing, it's not acquisition, it's I don't have the people I need to do the job. AI removes that need. So as we go from a $1 million business to a $10 million business to a $100 million business, nothing's changing. That AI is just sitting there humming and getting better in every interaction it's having. There's nothing a human can do to match that level of efficiency. So when you said three or four things, I'd like to end it with two. The first thing is some self-mastery of AI. I've actually used the thing. And my second thing is, as a company, then some company level of mastery of implement a project, because there are too many conversations happening in a vacuum. There's too many people talking about what AI will and won't do that aren't actually doing something. And until you do something, you're not having a real conversation. You're having a hypothetical, theoretical conversation. Do something, implement a project so that you can start understanding what it's going to do, what it's not going to do, what the impact is, what the pros are, what the cons are, and all those wonderful things. So those are the two things I'd say.
Awesome. When I heard you speak once, you said, you asked the audience a question. Do you know why Edison invented the light bulb?
Yeah.
I was like, everybody's giving all these different answers. I'm sitting there just thinking, what does that got to do with AI? I said, kind of watching what you're doing. And then finally you said, the real answer is he invented the light bulb to demonstrate to people what electricity could do.
Mm-hmm.
You liken that to electricity to AI is it can do so many different things. So I want you to give us count the story, and then you're going to tell us your experience, but then I'm going to have Scott tell us his experience. But you had an experience with your son that was he's the younger of the two, correct?
Yeah.
And he was struggling reading. Just tell us the story. This is be an example of something that can be done with it. And then I want Scott to share with you two things he's done, both for his child and for his wife.
So the first thing is there's a book called Rewiring the Web, which I recommend everybody read. And it talks about the fact that in the future, computing will be paid for in cycles. And essentially, what the theory is of the book is that as every technology matures, the unit of exchange becomes smaller. So electricity is one of the first examples of we go from this fixed generators of like, you want electricity, you're going to have to pay X million dollars to put generators in and generate the power. Because electricity was around before Edison. What he was trying to prove specifically was distributed electricity, that we could generate the electricity here and use it over here. Before that, people were using generators, plant, so you had heavy capex. You had really heavy capex and really heavy opex. And his whole point was you don't need the capex, you don't need to buy the plant, you can just buy the electricity. And it's now down to the point where I've asked this question for 2 decades. Nobody that I have met yet can answer the question, how much does it cost to turn on your light switch? Like, not one single person can say, yeah, if I turn on my light switch for 10 minutes, it costs me this much money. Because it's such an inconsequential unit now that we don't bother tracking it. People can tell me what their electricity bill is on a monthly basis, but no one can tell me how much it costs to turn on their thing. So electricity is essentially abundant. And that leads to all of these other inventions that happen as a result. It's no longer a barrier. And in the book Rewiring the Web, it was written in the 90s, he makes the same prediction about computing. He says at the moment, in the 90s, we're going to buy these servers, and eventually we'll rent the servers, and then eventually we'll rent a part of the server, and eventually we'll get to the stage where we just rent the compute cycle, the CPU click of a server, which is where we are now. That's what cloud computing is. But he predicted that back in the 90s, and he went, every single technology goes in the same way. So when Edison was walking along the riverbank with his Scottish clerk, he was like, I think we could generate it here and generate it there. He got all that working. He invented, for those that don't know, the resistor, the capacitor, and the transformer were all inventions of Edison. Like all of the things that we need to generate electricity somewhere and use it somewhere else, all Edison. But no one would buy it. No one would buy it. So he invented the light bulb. And he literally said, I need to turn on a switch over here and a light go off over here in order to make people understand that we don't need to generate it in the same place, which I've just found such an amazing story because that isn't second and third order consequence. That's second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth order consequences of what happens when something like electricity becomes abundant. The question, therefore, is AI has surpassed us in terms of raw IQ. What happens when that becomes an abundant resource? And that's the thing that we haven't yet figured out. And I don't know if we can figure it out because I don't know if you could have been Edison walking along a riverbank and gone, what would happen when electricity is abundant? So you can make like this whiteboard marker relied on electricity. There is nothing I can see that didn't rely on electricity in its production. So it's a phenomenal concept to think of, like what would that pre and post world be? Now, to your second point, I was in my early days of AI, my son was finding it hard to read. He's 7 now, so he'd have been about 5 at the time. And everyone was saying to me, "Oh, it's okay, boys learn slower than girls." I'm like, "No, I don't accept that. That's not my reality." So I went and sat in his bedroom so I could think. Literally just an old thing I learned about thinking time. And I was sitting in his bedroom thinking, why is he finding this hard? What are we doing wrong? How do we need to support him better? And it struck me that all of his books were hand-me-downs from his sister, from Olivia. And we didn't try and do this, but my wife and I have raised the 2 most gender-specific children typical ever. Like my daughter likes fairies and rainbows and sparkles and purple and all that. Unicorns everywhere. And my son likes poo and snot and trucks and trains and bugs and dinosaurs. So looking around Sam's room, everything, all the books that we'd given him to read were all hand-me-downs from Olivia. So they're all books around rainbows and unicorns and fairies. And I was like, hang on, why would we ever think this is going to work? Why would we ever think somebody is going to learn to read, which is quite a hard thing to do, when the things we're asking him to read are things that are not interesting to him? And if we don't give him books that are actually on subjects he's interested in, he's never going to read. So I went to Amazon, as every good dad would, and filled up a shopping cart. And it struck me, I was like, hang on a second. I wonder if we can use AI to write a book. So I went on to ChatGPT and said, hey, what process would a best-selling kids author go through to write a book? And it said, you would do this. I'm like, well, let's do that then. So across the next couple of hours, we wrote this book called Sam the Space Pirate Visits the Mutant Moon. And the level of the language was specific for him. I was like, no, he's not going to understand that word. Let's use a different word. It has a poo cannon, which you can only fire once. It's rescuing his sister because he's the younger, so he's often like the horse while she's the cowboy. So I'm like, no, I want him to be the cowboy. I want him to be the hero of this story. So we wrote a book for him, and I gave it to him. And yeah, it was a very touching moment. He said, "Daddy, you wrote me a book." And it's the first time his iPad got put down and Minecraft didn't exist anymore. And he read this book cover to cover to cover to cover, and then asked for another one and another one and another one. And now he's now 7 and he has the reading age of an 11-year-old. So he is now 4 years ahead because we've used AI to write him a bunch of books. And that was the day that I realized truly what AI was and what it could do and how it could work and how it could enrich our lives, not destroy our lives. So yeah, that was a good day.
That's awesome. That's incredible. I've listened to that story a few times, and I did something, or I tried to do something similar, and I've come up against a couple of roadblocks. But one thing I did figure out how to do was write a custom love song to my wife, and it took me like a good week or two to do it. But what came of it was my daughter, who can't talk, she's about 15 months now, for a month straight, we just danced to that song as I was making tweaks and different things. And now every time it comes on, she gets the biggest grin and wants to dance and shimmy, and it's become really special. And that's what I think is so cool about AI is it allows you to do things that you couldn't otherwise. It gives you the time, and even though you might give it some of the creativity, it can execute at such a high level that it's a professional made song and no one's singing it other than AI. The music is all AI. It's pretty impressive.
Peter Swain really knows about AI. However, we're going to cut it here and call this part 1 of a 2-part interview. We'll see you next week for part 2.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Millions with Jason and Scott Henderson. Check the show notes for any links or contact information about today's guest. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss any future episodes.